All right, here we are already on the second day, the second lesson, and I forgot to hit record on the during the actual lesson, so I'm doing another shortened one here for lesson 2. So days 1 and 2 of the creation week, and you'll see we're going to be using Genesis 1 verses 1 through 8. So I'll read those here. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. So we're going to start there. I asked on the sheets what was created or done on the first day. Obviously, we read there, God created the heavens, or heaven, and earth. He also created light. So that's what God made and created. Now let's talk a little bit about that. In the beginning, we see that word, that's important. In the beginning, God has created. Here, we can say an introduction, along with light, is time. Okay? Our minds have a hard time wrapping themselves around the fact that God is infinite. We always think of a beginning. I mean, there's a beginning of heaven. There's a beginning of the angels in heaven. But to God, there was no beginning. He is infinite. And that can be very difficult for us to wrap our minds around. Okay? So, we also see that God created out of nothing. He spoke. That also is a key aspect here. Man is not able to behave in the same manner. Man can't create something out of nothing. We can't speak and say, you want a go-kart? Go-kart. And there's a go-kart. That's fantasy. That's not possible. So we need to see that God spoke and things happen. That's an important part as well here. God created out of nothing. Again, that's something man can't do either. I can't speak and just create things, and I can't make something out of nothing. I might have a great idea in my head and come up with a really neat invention, but I cannot then create it out of nothing. I need to go find some other materials or other chemicals or other substances and use those to be able to create what I have in my mind. So that too here is very unique. God created those things, and that's just different than how we can invent things. And that's what I asked there. Read Hebrews 11 verse 3, and we see that God created something out of nothing. He spoke. We cannot do either of those things. We can't make something out of nothing. We can invent things. We can make pretty marvelous things. God's given us a wonderful, marvelous brains, and we see that in the advances in today's society and in our knowledge and understanding of things. They are great, and God has given us those abilities, but there is nothing that comes close to what God did here on the first day. Now I'd like to also, there's that word form and void, and I put that in your define of void. Void would be the absence of something, or it's, well, sometimes we talk about there might be a void in my backyard. There's a large hole. Or maybe the detectives in the house, they notice that on the table there's dust everywhere, but one spot there's no dust. There's a little void of dust there. Okay? The earth was without form and void. There was no definite substance. We talk about being like a cake batter. It's not finished. It's kind of just all mixed together, and it's it really doesn't have any shape or form either. It takes the form of whatever objects it's in, a bowl or a cake pan. But once it's baked, then it definitely has form, and it takes up a space, and we can say definitely what it is. Okay, so it's empty of those finished parts of the mountains and the rivers and the trees and the animals and the birds. Okay, but it's all there mixed together. We can even say, the liquids and which would be the waters and the solids, probably even the gases. They're all just kind of mixed together in one large substance, and later God will call those things forth. He'll separate those things. But for now, He does that. And then it's through the Spirit we see there too. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the water. So by that Spirit working, when God spoke, things came to be. So already there we see that triune God, Spirit, Father, Son. So that is that part. There's also light. Obviously we know that God called forth light. Light stands for those things that are good. Jesus, we always talk about being the light that came into the world, whereas darkness represents sin. And God brought the light here. And again, it would be very difficult for us. We see he called the light day, and the darkness he called night. He had separated those things. What exactly that was like on the first day is different than what we think of. We think of night and day because of the sun, but there wasn't a light holder yet. There wasn't the sun that hadn't been created. So what exactly that was like, again, it's something for our minds to be curious about, but we may not completely be able to understand and know it. But when he created light, he created time. So we have the, you could say like seconds, minutes, and hours. We see here day, because God said the evening and the morning were the first day. We don't have like the seasons yet. That's an earthly thing. We don't have weather. Those are other things that are controlled eventually by the sun, when the sun is, or when light is placed in the sun as a light holder, but different here. Okay. Then on day 2, let's read verses 6 through 8 there. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day." The firmament has always, I can remember sitting in a classroom just having a terrible hard time understanding that firmament. And even now it's something very difficult always for our brains to get wrapped around. But we can imagine the whole universe, okay? God is the only thing that's infinite. So even the universe has an end somewhere. Will man ever be able to find it? I don't think so. But there is an end. It's far out there. And in that universe, we find the sun, and the moon, and stars, and planets, and stars, and space, and everything we think of, all the galaxies, and all that beauty that God has created there. And so we need to keep those things in place. So I guess the firmament above with the waters, they help hold those things in place in their space. Maybe not like the waters that we think of below. So they're not waters the way that we think of them, but they help to hold them in place. And then there was a separation. Okay, the waters above, which hold those things in place, and then the waters below. And those are the things that we think of more. The waters below are lakes and rivers and streams and dew and fog and mist, clouds. Those are the waters below that firmament. And two, to read there that the firmament is something, that means stretched forth or beaten out. If you've ever seen glass, heated glass stretched out and done that way, you can think of it that way. So that firmament separated so that the two different parts would not be one. They were separate. So we see too those waters above, the firmament that was created above the earth, also allows for radio communications, satellites to talk to each other. If you listen to the radio, those radio waves are going up from some type of transmitter up into the sky and reflecting back down. So that firmament also created that separation. So without that firmament in there, we would not have that as well. So God made that. Again, it's the firmament is not always, it's a separation. Sometimes we struggle with thinking of the waters above and the waters below. That can get hard for our minds to wrap themselves about. Let's see, on your sheets, so on day 2, that's what we have, just the firmament. Okay, day 1, God created heaven and the earth, and he created light, separated light from darkness. On the second day, God created the firmament. He separated the waters above from the waters below. And again, we see there the evening and the morning were the second day. So there's a separation there of day. The last thing on that sheet I asked you was to read Psalm 145, verse 10.
And it's a beautiful psalm that applies. And verse 10, all thy works shall praise thee, O Lord, and thy saints shall bless thee. All of God's creation. That's a beautiful thing. It's a good, you can find good Psalter numbers based on that. All of God's creation speaks to him. Everything that he's created. It is such a blessing in my mind to be curious about God's creation, desire to know more and want to know more and understand more. And Ecclesiastes verse 13 speaks that, and Solomon here says, and I gave my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. So to be curious is a beautiful thing, to want to know about God's creation, understand it. We won't perfectly, we won't have all the answers, but God's creation is so beautiful and so wonderful. It is a marvelous thing for us to be curious about. So that's the end of lesson 2. Hopefully this recording this way was okay for you, and I can assure you tomorrow's lesson will definitely be back in the regular classroom.